You are listening to Specifically for Seniors, a podcast designed for a vibrant and diverse senior community. I'm your host, Dr. Larry Barsh. Join me and a lineup of experts as we discuss a wide variety of topics that will empower, inform, entertain, and inspire as we celebrate the richness and wisdom of this incredible stage of life.
Jewish mothers are all the same, everywhere, but very few Jewish mothers co-host a true crime podcast with their son. Our guests today are Karmela Waldman, an 80-something-year-old psychotherapist and Holocaust survivor, and her son Joel Waldman, who was an award-winning journalist that chose to leave his network news job. The two created a true crime podcast called Surviving the Survivor and a book with the same name. I know I could have used the word eponymous, but the way things are going today, I was just totally worried about pronouncing it. Being a son who also had a Jewish mother, I have no idea where this conversation is going to end up. Karmela, Joel, thanks for coming on Specifically for Seniors.
Thank you so much for having us. Larry, all I can say is our effort, the three of us, to try to actually get onto this software to actually broadcast this podcast, that should have been the podcast, because it probably would have gotten more views than any Joe Rogan podcast. If you guys had to see what I went through there. But I'll tell you, Larry, you give me a little hope, because it makes me feel, and I don't mean to beat up on a man that's down, but Karmela was almost Mark Zuckerberg-like compared to what I was dealing with you. But we're all on here, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I can tell you one thing. I guess all Jewish mothers are very similar, but my Jewish mother is a little different.
I think we'll get into that a little later. Let's start by talking about your podcast. I mentioned that you and Karmela are a Holocaust survivor and therapist, and you were a journalist. When and why did you two come up with the idea to host a podcast?
Well, thank you for the question again. On a sincere note, thank you for having us here. And I think this is an amazing idea to kind of host a podcast that's geared towards people of a slightly older generation. I think it's an amazing idea. And Larry, you're an inspiration. I just hope that I'm not still doing my podcast at 87, because if I am, I will be completely worn to the bone.
Well,
but anyway,
actually, I'm 88, so I'm hanging in.
You look great. So I'm going to give you a 10-second background on me. I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. I went to Brandeis University. I detect a Massachusetts accent there, Larry.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
Yeah, it comes out when I get back to Massachusetts.
So went to school in Waltham. Had no idea what to do. Every single kid at Waltham was Brandeis was either going to law school or medical school. So my dad, who's was a retired psychiatrist, he passed sadly a couple of years ago. But long story short, he had the brilliant idea of sending me to graduate school for education, because he had a friend, Bernie Burkoff, who was very successful in the daycare business. And I was good with kids. And for some reason, he thought that'd be a good idea. I taught for a year and a half, and it was a great experience, but I don't think I've ever hated anything more. So long story short, I ended up at NBC at a page program, and that led me into reporting. And then my final job, after doing the local market tour and being an investigative reporter at Fox 5 in New York City, I ended up at Fox News Channel. And then the whole Me Too movement struck, and you might have heard of Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes and and it was just a unmitigated disaster inside of Fox News. And I had 3 kids, decided to leave. And then the pandemic hit, And I said, I got to start a podcast because this is the future. And had good contacts within the media world. I could have probably tried to get some big names. And I said, I know exactly who is the right person. Um, Stunningly beautiful, incredibly smart, charismatic, highly opinionated. And I asked Carm, and the rest, as they say, is history. However, we did start with just sort of bizarre topics, talking to Carol Baskin of Tiger King fame back then, Dr. Avi Loeb, astrophysicist. And then we stumbled upon a story that brought us to true crime. And I've now sort of become the de facto Larry King of true crime. I do a live show every night on YouTube with a panel. We call them the best guests in true crime, which they really are. Shout out to Steve Cohen for helping us there. And Carm is now sort of the matriarch of the show and joins in. She doesn't know this yet, but we're doing a show upcoming on the Alexander brothers who are in trouble, and she will be joining us on that. So that is the genesis.
I am semi-retired. I am 85, and I am very honored to
Larry,
be
by the way, I
asked
don't
to
think
be
you're going
on
to be able to
your.
ask a single question. Go ahead, Carm.
No, I will control myself. Ask me one single question.
Please don't control yourself. Okay, one
Don't worry.
question. What's the story behind the title of the podcast, Surviving the Survivor?
Well, first of all, let me just give you the situation. We are all, Joel and his family live about 10 minutes car ride from me in Miami Beach. And I am living in a condominium. My husband died about a year and a half ago after 63 years of a happy marriage. And that's not only my description, it's outside observance impression also. Anyway, after all this time, while he was already ailing, Joel approached me if I, during COVID, if I would like to be part of a podcast. And I didn't hesitate like 1 second. I didn't even breathe in or out. I immediately said yes. And my husband encouraged us to do it because he knows the two of us. He's a psychiatrist and he was a psychiatrist and he knew us. Anyway, then one more very important information about podcasts in general. We kind of tried to learn about podcasts. This was in 2021, correct? So,
Larry, by the way, you can ask a question, but you're still not going to get an answer. Go
Oh,
ahead, Carm.
but 1 second. The important thing about podcasts in general is that the ones that succeed, such as Joel's, and in the beginning mine also, but the one that is now mostly in Joel's hands, you have to find a niche. Only podcasts that cater to a niche will be surviving because there are a million
Yeah,
podcasts.
Larry, Carm is now doing podcast consulting for $12.50 an hour. She will help you with your show. Carm, you never answered the questions. Why the title "Surviving the Survivor"? After all that,
Okay, because to survive my
yeah.
personality, you have to be a
So Larry,
survivor.
she always kind of in jest, she would say, I'm just trying to survive in a rough. My mom has all these weird expressions, but one of them was, "I'm just trying to survive in a rough world." For whatever reason, whenever we would get somewhere, Larry, you may remember this. This is way before my time. She would say, "Thank you for flying Ozark Airlines." Like if we were on a long car trip, weird things. She likes to say, "Over my dead body," all these different like catchphrases. But Carm is she doesn't hold back. She is brutally honest, and that's why it's in the title of my book, Surviving the Survivor. And that is, it's kind of obviously a play on words. She's a Holocaust survivor, and I'm trying to survive the actual survivor. One thing, real quick, and we can talk about this a little more, that I found out during the course of the book is I'm not exactly normal, and I didn't realize the extent of kind of generational trauma, which Carm tries to scoff off. My dad would have laughed at because my dad is was a very unique psychiatrist. But they're
He believed that Joel is trying to
I operate.
hook into this the survivors children's trauma. He tries to use that as an alibi for being a little
Yeah, this is
talk.
why it's called Surviving the Survivor. No, I have anxiety. I worry. I have irrational everything. But Larry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Larry's like,
my next question was, you both host the podcast. What is it like working with your mother? But I don't have to answer or ask that question anymore. It doesn't seem calm and peaceful at all.
if you had like they do have this now, by the way, a portable EKG machine. If I had that connected to my chest 24/7 and my mother spoke to me, you would see my heart rate rise every single time. Carm is not like I have friends who have like these very soothing parents who speak to them calmly. Carm is unbelievably excitable. Definitely why I have some anxiety, and definitely I blame her fully for some OCD. But we get along great in terms of a working relationship. We don't have a normal relationship because we probably talk 70 times a day, and I'm 55, so it's definitely dysfunctional. I also have no idea how I'm going to continue on once she's no longer here, which I tell her frequently. But it's a good working relationship. And Larry, I'm interested in you. You were born and raised in Boston. I know you were a dentist, but you seem
Right.
like an interesting guy. You were doing some cool stuff, photography and stuff.
Yeah. This podcast came up during the pandemic. My wife, who just recently passed away, that's why we had to
Sorry.
cancel last month.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. Was in memory care. And we were kind of restricted to who we could get together with. So I couldn't find people to talk to in person. I decided to start the podcast. And that's how it came about.
Wow.
Where are you physically?
In a chair right in front of my camera.
But where?
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 About 30 miles outside of Boston.
Okay.
By the way, I don't want to get in
Okay.
the middle of anything, but maybe it's probably a little premature. I can set up a little love connection here, but first I would have to look through Larry's.
Very, very, very,
First,
very,
I would have
very
to look through
funny.
Larry's tax returns and find. Larry, do you have children?
Yeah, 2 kids. One's in Los Angeles, one's in New Jersey.
Oh, I'm from Jersey. What part of Jersey?
Summit.
Oh, nice. And what's the one in LA do?
That's my daughter. She right now. Why are we talking about me?
Because I'm curious.
Oh.
And then we'll get back.
Because he's very inappropriate. He always thinks he's the interviewer. He has a professional deviation. Joel, you are being interviewed and not the interviewer.
Larry, very quickly, what does she do in LA? Then I'll let you ask all the questions.
Right now, she's working out of her house, but she's always been interested in media.
Oh, nice.
So
and she's safe from all the fires?
She managed WBZ radio in Boston for a while. My son used to be a TV director. Now he's a suit. So,
very nice.
Let's get back to your book. You say it's a brutally honest conversation about life and death with your mom, a Holocaust survivor, therapist, and the podcast co-host. Why a book?
A great question. I've been meaning to do something. Growing up, so one thing, my mother is, despite going what she went through, and despite she had a child that passed away from an illness at a young age, and then recently my father passed away after 63 years. And by the way, my father was, I think, the toughest thing on her by far. But She is very positive, incredibly optimistic, always. Never really looks into the rear view mirror. And so, growing up, I kind of, obviously knew my mother was a Holocaust survivor. Number one, it's like when your dad is a celebrity or something, you don't care. Like Adam Sandler, I heard him say his kids couldn't care less. Well, my mom was a Holocaust survivor, and I just thought it was normal. It wasn't a big deal to me. We never really talked about it much. There was a photo of the nun. There was a nun that saved my mom named Matilda Gorchonich, and that sat in our house, and that's not really normal for a Jewish kid in suburban New Jersey to have. But nevertheless, there was a photo of a nun. And then, I was always like these kaleidoscopic images and fragments of stories. Long story short, I just didn't really know the story. And then in 1999, I was in media and I was bouncing around a few jobs, and I ended up working for the Michael Moore, the heavyset guy with a hat. And he encouraged me to make a documentary, which I didn't know how to do, never did, but I did fly to Switzerland. That's where my grandmother was living, my mom's mom, where she relocated after the war. And I interviewed everybody. I interviewed her. I interviewed my aunt. I interviewed my mom. I went to Israel and interviewed my mom's best friends, but I was so busy with my career, I just never did anything with it. Those interviews live on YouTube now. But then fast forward to after my Fox News career, and we start this podcast, and I'm spending all this time with her. We were doing, this is a odd thing I'm about to tell you, but we were doing an interview with Carol Baskin at the height of Tiger King fame. And she said at one point in the interview, your mother is by the way, Carm was calling it Lion King the entire time, which she thought was not purpose. She was doing it sincerely. She was calling it Lion King. But anyway, Carol Baskin says to me, your mother's like my beloved tiger. She's an endangered species. And that for some reason, that really hit home. I don't know why. And the podcast was getting successful. And then I was having a lot of I still do have a lot of high powered kind of criminal defense attorneys and FBI profilers. And a bunch of them had books. And somehow I got connected to the publisher who knew me from my Fox 5 days. And that was it. And then I just sat and wrote and wrote and wrote. The book is like 20% the Holocaust story and 80% life advice. If you ever read Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom, he wrote a blurb for the book, and it's a lot along those lines. It's life advice from my mom, but it is, I say this half kiddingly, it's a laugh out loud Holocaust story. It's not a typical Holocaust story.
Funny you mentioned Maury Schwartz, who was I guess I can say it now, was a patient. And my story is, if he used to come in on Wednesdays. If he came in a day earlier, I could have been a famous writer. So
Exactly. That's a good
That's
one.
interesting. That's really interesting. He must have been a sweet guy.
Oh, he was one of the nicest people I've ever met. Carm, I'm easy saying Carm because that's what we call our granddaughter as well.
That's fine.
You encouraged Joel to write the book in a way only a Jewish mother could encourage someone to write a book. There's an email that starts the book, and I'm sort of tempted to read it to everyone here.
Please do. It's a voicemail, but please do.
It's not an email.
Voice.
It's a voice.
I did not know, full disclosure. I'm also paranoid, so I always have to say something related to I did not know that he was taping my phone messages. I would call if he wasn't there. I would leave him a little message. I never suspected he was writing them down.
So in an adult way, I will read your voicemail to Joel. Joel, this is your mother. Just write the fucking book. You need to just write words and not worry about it being a masterpiece. Are you really vain enough to think you're going to write a bestseller your first time? You're not Dostoevsky. Just write and stop thinking so much. It's just to have a companion to our podcast. Okay, call your sweet mother when you get a chance. And don't forget, your taxes are due in 2 weeks. That's my mother. God.
Even I like it when you read it.
Oh, that has to.
I refuse to get embarrassed. He deserves what I wrote because I think people get the writer's block because they want to write the perfect book. I kind of protect myself by saying I can jabber away, but I cannot write. I truly cannot write in any language well. I noticed that as a teenager
Larry, I'll
already.
tell you an
But
interesting story.
It just happens that Joel writes very, very well.
I
Like,
I went to this like I
journalistic.
went to this like in Miami. There's like a hipster food court where it's very busy, crowded. I'm not a big music. I'm a big like news guy, but I would put on country music. I have no idea, like Johnny Cash, and I would just go and write for like 3 hours at a time. I never rewrote a single word of this book, and I never went back and read it. So one of these days, I'll go back
And
and
the editors didn't change anything either. Maybe that's what got me in trouble with the cursing because the editors didn't change anything either. But I do curse only with Joel. I don't. Did you see in the back of the book there is a statement? Did you notice that? I don't know if
Yeah,
you
but I
did.
read it a while ago, so I don't remember.
yeah.
Anyway,
Carm,
I
don't
I
give it
am
away. Don't
just
give it away. It's a tease. It's a
okay.
tease. Carm does something at the end of the book, but yeah, I have 3 children who are 10, 8, and 5, and they know every curse word in multiple languages thanks to their grandmother.
Yeah, I know what to educate them with the essential
But Larry,
stuff.
you said your
But
granddaughter, you call her Carm. What's her name?
Carmel.
Oh, wow.
you are kidding. I never met anybody before whose name
It
was
begins with a
Carmel.
C, not a K.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That's the American
Right.
pronunciation, spelling, the American spelling, not the Euro, not the in Yugoslavia where I was born. Everything was phonetic. So if it sounded like k, they wrote it with a
Carm, let
K.
Larry get to at least his third question.
All right, breathe in, breathe out. Let's
And
hear.
in her stand-up comedy routine, which she's attempting right now, she tells everybody she's 5'13". So
Oh, that's
she's a
so cute. Is she
yeah,
really?
she's 6'1".
Is-
She's the shortest
That's
of the grandchildren.
Whoa.
that's very interesting. She could be a model.
Yeah. Yes. A couple of episodes, I showed a film by John Pollock. I don't know if you've ever seen it, entitled Beyond Babi Yar, about John's family that were murdered in Ukraine outside of the concentration
Yeah,
camps.
yeah. I am familiar with Babi
Do
Yar.
you want to share some of your Holocaust stories?
I have to tell you first. I have the need to tell you first. Last night, my daughter is here. My daughter has 5 daughters, and we are all together. That's the reason I'll have to get off the phone because otherwise we are not going to have a meal for Shabbat. So I have to go and buy it before they close. Yes, yes, but I have to tell you where we were yesterday because it's interesting for your audience. We are in Miami, and the Nova, which on October 7th, if you of 2023, there was a Nova concert, music festival, and very close to the place where the Hamas broke through and slaughtered about 300 beautiful young people. And somebody created an exhibit of that horror story yesterday. Yesterday I went to see it with three of my granddaughters and my daughter, and I don't have a story that is as horrendously horrific as this. Even this has nothing to do with the Holocaust. Uh, I was almost 5 year old when it happened to me. The Holocaust happened to me. I was born in 1939 in August. World War II, as you know, started in September. And because we were in a part of Europe that the Holocaust spread to that part of Europe, which eventually became Hungary. They didn't take us to Auschwitz until the other parts of Europe were already liberated. So it was virtually towards the very end, but my memory, my mother at the age of 84, she, by the way, died at 98. And at 84, she took a record player and registered all her experiences. And one of the most horrific memories that I don't have, but my mother, who was also a survivor, had, and which is written down, and to me, in my own imagination, it's probably the most horrendous scenes that one can witness. In Budapest, where she was hiding with false documents at that moment, she was 34, she was going on the street and saw a tramway coming towards her. At the same time, he saw SS soldiers leading a group of men, women, and children to the Danube. The Danube was almost frozen, but what they did, they took Jews randomly and they brought them to the. This is background. This is not what my mother saw, but this is today. There is even a monument there of people's shoes made out of bronze to remind people what happened in Budapest at that time. Anyway, what my mother witnessed was this group of men and women being led towards the Danube to be shot and killed. And one man, young man, jumped up on a moving tramway to avoid going with them. And my mother witnessed that 2 minutes later, the people in the tramway pushed him back down again.
Mhm.
To me, that scene is like heart-wrenching to nth degree. I heard screams of rape. I heard shots as a 5 year old this was ironically when we were liberated from the Nazis by the Allies, who happened to be Russian, who happened to be actually, I researched it, Ukrainian soldiers who were fighting as part of the Soviet Union. They came into the basement where we were all hiding, and they were raping women, shooting men. They were already completely deprived of all humanity because they were fighting already for 5 years, never seeing family and never being in their own environment. So that I was, but I wasn't 100% aware of what was going on at the time as a
Yeah.
5 year old. I was a very precocious 5 year old.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joe, The book discusses a family's lives and death, as you say, in a brutally honest way, and yet it never is depressing. How did you manage to work humor into that book?
I have no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. I think my mom has always said that black humor is what keeps her, people going. My dad had a really funny, kind of dry sense of humor. By the way, my mom really didn't answer your question again. So, just very briefly, she was about 4.5. She was living in the former Yugoslavia. Her father was a successful optometrist, didn't think the Nazis were coming. My grandmother thought the Nazis were coming. Eventually, the Nazis came. My grandmother grabs my mom. They run through a little hole. She had fake papers. She knew a Gentile doctor, and Dr. Scherzer, Ivo Scherzer, and he took my mother to a Catholic school for boys, and that's where she met the nun, and the nun took her in. My mother was converted to Catholicism in there, and then eventually was reunited with my um, grandmother, and they were, before this siege of Budapest, they were holed up. And my mother, who in the Catholic school learned all her Hail Marys and all that, they were still kind of undercover, pretending not to be Jewish. My mother would say her Hail Marys and all that out loud. They would have to run outside to grab some part of a horse that was bombed to eat to survive, and then eventually the Russians came and liberated them, and they had a 2-week walk in the freezing cold back to Serbia. So a little different, and we went back to Serbia for that's how the book ends. We went there and with my children last year, and my grandfather, very surreal for me because I really should be the the great grandchild, but I'm the grandchild. And I have a 5-year-old son whose grandmother's a Holocaust survivor. I bet you there's not another 5-year-old in the country who can say that. I just happened to get married late. Um, so the point I'm making is we went back to Serbia, and we go, the however many thousands of miles, and then after like 20 minutes in this cemetery, no one could find my grandfather's name. My mom's maiden name is Chris Haber, Krishaber, and it's weird. In this cemetery, which is in the middle of nowhere in Serbia, there was a lot of Chris Haber headstones. I guess it was a common Serbian name for Jewish people. Long story short, my mom was like, "Okay, let's leave." We just, flew out there to see this. Eventually, my wife found it. It's my great grandfather's burial place, but since there's zero remains of my grandfather, who was incinerated, they just wrote his name not to cheer up the
He
audience.
was gassed in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
My father and grandfather were gassed in
So the
Auschwitz.
only thing on the tombstone is his name. But back to your, so I just wanted to let the audience, that's really kind of the story in a nutshell. But back to your question, I really have no idea. I think we use humor to just deflect. And I was just capturing real conversation. I wrote around the conversation to kind of build the meat of the book, but it's really pretty accurate.
I know what it's like to have had a mother who knew when and where all my buttons were and knew exactly how to push them. Um, so let's talk about Jewish guilt.
You have another
May I
9
say
hours.
something before you get into that? Uh, you had the mother who knew where to push all the buttons, but there is also it's a two-way street. Joel knows exactly where to push my buttons, and he loves to push my buttons. He loves to watch me losing it. Completely loves it. There is nothing he likes more than to make me crazy a little. But listen, guys, I have to go. I'm not
Larry, I'll
joking.
stay with you.
Yeah, I may have to get back to your phone to download some of the content as a separate track. but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, shoot a last question for this for me.
A last,
Ask
Yeah, real quick,
question before
okay.
the
Carm,
exit.
if you stay on at the end, Larry doesn't have to do any work. Just you can leave, but leave your StreamYard running till it uploads.
Thank you.
Yeah, both
Oh,
both of
okay.
them just stared at me blankly. Go ahead.
No, I didn't stare at you blankly. I know. So you feel guilty about your clothes and sunglasses, Joel?
Oh, yeah, I've got a little guilt there. So this is interesting. I'm a damaged human, I think, because again, number one, the one thing my mother hates the most is being a victim of anything. She never called herself a victim. And in the true crime world, they really are referred to as survivors. But my mother, it did go through the Holocaust. My father was a psychiatrist,
Hello.
and they say, Carm, you can't take a call mid podcast.
Hello. I am taking the call. One
You,
second. Arden.
Larry,
Yeah,
this happens on my
I'll meet
podcast.
you in
It's good.
10 minutes.
I bet you it's never happened to you before.
Okay, bye.
When I started this podcast, I was so anxious about keeping everything really nice and professional. I don't care anymore.
Trust me, it's better if it's not. They want
That's how
authenticity.
life is. This is how life is. This
Yeah,
is real
Larry,
life,
you
you
just had
know?
that was a microcosm. That one phone call was my life, basically summed up. But
But may I say something?
uh,
I am not completely. I refuse to take the guilt 100%. 90%, okay, but 10% is yours, guys, because you weren't there ready at 10 when we were supposed to. And I told my daughter, and the store will close, and I'm gonna make my whole family of 5 daughters and their husbands and their children starve. I can't deal with that. So I have to go, and I would be most happy to talk to you another time if you want to interview me about anything, about guilt, about whatever.
Carm, when you hit leave studio, don't get completely out of StreamYard. Just hit.
I am not gonna leave studio. I leave it exactly as is right now.
Yeah, Larry, if you want to bounce her out, I guess, and then I can answer that question if you want to keep going, Larry.
Okay. Yeah, I can take her.
Larry, I do apologize to you sincerely. This is the first time I behaved this obnoxiously about breaking the session, but I have to go. Noblesse oblige, and I have to go.
It's not what I heard, but that's all right. Thanks for being on, Carm. I'll
Okay.
catch you again sometime.
Okay. Good luck to you, and may you continue. And the two of you, now he can say all the dirt about me because I won't be there to defend myself.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thanks for being on.
Bye. I am not going to touch at all. I leave it as is.
Thank you.
But I
A
tell you
Jewish
one
goodbye. She
thing.
can never say goodbye. I knew this was going to
I tell
happen.
you one thing. The way you set up this question, it was a very 20th century way of doing it. And I tell you why. Because you set it up as these castrating mothers who lay guilt for their children. That was the Freudian era. That's not in style anymore.
Yeah, but I went through it too.
Yeah, but my son is not a victim. If he's anything,
I'm
he's
a
a
victim of yours.
victimizer.
I'm a victim of yours. All right, Carm, if you're going to leave, say goodbye.
I love you guys. You have a wonderful session.
You have to hit leave studio. You can't. Now she'll walk around with us, with herself.
I
Larry,
am
you're going to need.
I am gonna walk around with you.
Yeah,
Just
Larry, you're
like
going to
this.
need to pop
How
her out
long
of the
will it
studio.
take before it downloads?
This
How
might be the
long?
greatest podcast ever recorded. I wish the whole world could hear this. But
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, look, we're going upside down now. But Larry, I think you're going to have to remove. Oh, there you go. Perfect. All right.
Oh, that
I
was more fun than I've had in a long time.
I apologize for everything. But no, to answer your question, so I was just getting to the point. My mom's a Holocaust survivor, and my dad is actually born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx. So he was a product of the Depression, and he was probably. I live in Miami Beach. probably the flashiest place on earth, Lamborghinis, plastic surgery, fake this, fake that. My dad drove the same car for 15 years. I don't think he ever even bought himself a suit. He would just he had this private practice. But anyway, the point I'm making is, um, those are two major events. Like he was kind of scarred from the Great Depression because his dad couldn't afford anything. He became a doctor. And then my mom goes through the Holocaust. So these combination of things, I've got this like irrational worry about running out of money. And then I've got my mother's thing. So it's, so she guilts me, if I'm spending a little more than I should have, but I'm good at kind of hiding it from her usually.
I was going to ask your mother if she wanted to be a co-host on my podcast.
She would love it.
I haven't had that much fun in a long time.
She would love it. You should.
One of the problems with podcasts that are directed at older adults, specifically for seniors, is an unfamiliarity with podcasts in general. So let's be specific about them being able to find your podcast.
Well, I appreciate that question. And kudos to you. I think it's great. And this is really, I don't know if you saw recently, Elon Musk tweeted out that, traditional media, and I agree with him, is dead and or dying. I'll give you an example without mentioning a name. I have a good friend who's a chief meteorologist, and he just lost his job literally a day ago because what they're doing now is, instead of having weather people, which is the most important thing for local news, they've lost so much revenue that they're firing all the weather people in all these local markets and finding like a central hub. And then they hire 2 weather people who do the weather for, Oakland, then Sacramento, Tucson, wherever in Alabama. And they're sitting in a studio 1,500 miles away. So the traditional business is going downhill. Elon Musk basically said the future is independent journalism, and people are going to be able to decide. It's kind of democratizing it. So kudos to you, because I think that obviously it's sad, and I know you're in the same boat as my mom. I was super close to my dad too, and my mother was very, very, they had a really good marriage. And, it's tough. Like, she's home alone. My sister happens to be visiting now. She keeps herself really busy, but it's tough. Like, your companion of all these years. I feel like seniors are a little bit of a forgotten segment of the society. So, I credit you and applaud you for creating something for them. I think it's very important, and I think this is for everybody, but definitely something seniors would be interested in.
So how do they find your podcast?
Oh, see, I was like my mom. I just caught didn't answer the question, disease. So our podcast, which is Surviving the Survivor, is found anywhere you listen to podcasts. So Spotify, Apple, Audible, you can listen to the podcast. And then the primary platform is actually YouTube. It's like a show. It's literally like a Larry King style show. I have a panel every night. We're talking about the biggest criminal cases and trials in the country with the best known. I've had Nancy Grace on the show. I've had Vinnie Politan, who's the lead anchor for Court TV. Mark Garagos, who represented Michael Jack, all these attorneys and people. And we do kind of a roundtable, but it's on YouTube every evening, Monday to Friday, either 5 or 7. Friday's show is always at 12:30. I kind of try to do the same thing in the podcast, which is, even though we're talking about really heavy subjects, try to keep it light with some humor. I think people appreciate that. And then personally, the book, by the way, people always say, for me personally, it drives me crazy. It's redundant, but personally, the book is incredibly important for me because it is my mother's story and it's her life advice. And I would literally be nothing without her, but figuratively too. So I tell everyone it's the most important story I've ever reported on. Same title as a podcast. I kept it easy, Surviving the Survivor. And that book is available literally anywhere books are sold. The easiest place is probably Amazon or Barnes and Noble online. You can order it. And I think, I tell everyone it'll change kind of how you see life.
So how do I get my podcast to 10 or 20,000 views?
Get a couple of tips. Are you on YouTube?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
That's why I'm upset that this is out of sync.
Yeah. Okay.
It would be much easier for audio.
Are you on social media?
Limited.
Yeah. We need to get you on socials. I hate it personally, but it's a necessary evil in this world. I know this is going to come out, a few days later, but the Supreme Court just ruled that TikTok can be banned. So it might be banned, which is it's gonna be. I saw of all people a cattle rancher, a young guy, and he in Austin, Texas, and he uses TikTok to promote his business, and so many people do it now. I mean, if YouTube goes away or Apple Podcast goes, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. But I mean, how long have you been doing the podcast?
February 2022.
Yeah, it's about when we started, maybe a hair before, but honestly, there is no real it's the Wild West. There's no real um, firm advice I can give, but I'll tell you this, and I heard this, not a huge fan of his, but I heard this on I heard Joe Rogan saying this, and he's obviously got the most successful podcast in the world. He said we're living in a world of just instant gratification. Instagram, you got these 10-second videos, a TikTok, 10-second videos, whatever. But he said there's a real thirst for, and this is why traditional media is dying, because in that world, sound bites are 8 to 12 seconds. Every time I have a guest on the show, the first thing they always say is, wow, I love this. Like, I can actually talk, because most of them do, traditional media, CNN, Fox News, and then they come on my show and they can actually talk for a long time. So the point I'm getting at with that is Joe Rogan said it's kind of counterintuitive. Everything is quick, but people are also like yearning for real conversation. So it's counterintuitive. Like when I told Carm I was going to go 5 nights a week, she said, "You're crazy. No one wants to listen to you." And this is not to sound immodest, and it's not me. It's the topics and the guests. But I get people saying, I wish your show was 3 hours. I wish you did it 7 days a week." So if you want to stay busier, Larry, you can. How often do you put a podcast out?
I started doing it once a week. Excuse me. Then I went to twice a month. The last couple of months have understandably been no podcasts. Getting back now. Without a staff, it's a lot of work.
It is. I'll tell you. I mean, I literally, people can't believe it. I mean, my wife is a former CBS news correspondent. She's, we call her the COE on the show, the chief of everything. And then I've got it's a family affair. My brother-in-law in California, in LA, he's like an audiophile. So he does all the sound engineering, and he puts everything out onto audio platforms. And then Steve Cohen, good friend of mine from the TV days, he's our booking producer. So it's a very important role because he books 3 guests a day, every day. But we are running really the equivalent of like Court TV or CNN with 4 people, not the, 20,000 people that some of these giant media companies, employ. But it's definitely a changing world. I love it. At first, it was really hard, but it's back to your question about how do you get more subscribers. If you have it in you, the more content, the better, and absolute consistency. obviously you had some serious mitigating circumstances, and again, I'm sorry about the loss of your wife, but once you're back in a normal rhythm, the more consistent and the more often you can do it, I think the better to build a subscribership.
The funny thing is, my son, having been a TV director and now supervisor at CNBC, listens to my editing and said, "You cut off the breath sounds." I said, "I don't care."
So I used to, when I first started at MSNBC, it was so new. That was my first job ever, was being a producer at MSNBC. But the building hadn't been built yet. No one had ever seen anything like this. They put it in a warehouse in Secaucus, New Jersey, and it was massive. I mean, like 50,000 square feet. It was crazy, with a studio right in the middle of the newsroom. But anyway, it wasn't ready yet. So when I started working there, I was actually working out of the CNBC offices. So I know CNBC well. Now they've, of course, moved. But I bet you I know. I probably crossed paths with your son. Has he been at CNBC for all these years?
For a long time. He was freelancer before that.
Yeah.
But now
I know a lot of people.
Yeah.
We definitely know a lot of people in common. So Barsh Jr., if you're listening, get me on CNBC. I'll talk my book. It won't be the boring business stuff.
This has been fun. And if I can get this synchronization straightened out in editing, it'll be even better. So
send it to your son and have one of the professional editors there fix it for you. It's the least he can do for you.
Yeah, tell him.
I will. What's his first name?
Andy Barsh.
Andy. Okay.
No,
yeah,
he's been.
I'm sure I've crossed
years.
paths. I'm sure I've crossed paths.
We used to go to see some of his work in New York when he was freelancing, and he did almost all the daytime TV shows. So the audiences were 90% women, and me.
Yeah.
And he would always have the cameraman come up the aisle, and I knew what was happening. I'd get back to the office, and the patients would look at me and say, "I saw you on television." God, no. Anyway.
Well, if you want to meet women getting into true crime, our audience is 82%. For some reason, women are very obsessive about true crime. It's 82% female demographics. So, but Larry, I mean, you're a natural. I love your interview style. I love the idea for the show. And if I can help, or my mother can help in any way, please let us know.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank Karm as well. And it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, I loved it. It's probably my favorite podcast, and I'm not blowing smoke. I really enjoyed it, and wishing you all the success in the world, and only good things from here on in.
Thanks.
If you found this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, tell your friends and family, and click on the follow or subscribe button. We'll let you know when new episodes are available. You've been listening to Specifically for Seniors. We'll talk more next time. Stay connected.